Steve Cochran Show. Andrea's here. Scott's in for Nick. You know who you are. And it's always a better place when Bridget Gaynor is on the show. Bridget Gaynor, Cook County Commissioner in the 10th.
Good morning.
Oh, do we have questions for you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Who's in charge of spelling at City Hall?
You know what? They haven't appointed the commissioner of spelling. That's a vacant position.
I don't know if their money's in the budget, but Rich Gaitis announced that he was out, and they spelled his name 9 different ways, and it doesn't have a silent P.
No.
But it led to, it's like a small example of a bigger problem at City Hall and the mayor, in that he appears to, as Maria Papa said here, not be ready for prime time. I don't know how city residents could have a whole lot of confidence now. He's not in front of the public that much, and when he is, it's a word salad. I mean, if you had to take him out and put him in politics camp, what's the first thing fundamentally he needs to fix? Is it messaging?
Well, look, messaging is always important because if you don't tell people what you're doing, they don't know. Tons of things happen behind the bowels in City Hall, like every large institution, but you got to be able to convey it. The messaging at this City Hall is especially problematic, and I think it's because you have when you don't appear in front of people, they assume the worst, and then when you have people who are running the communications division that haven't actually done this before, but also who see the press as kind of a problem to be avoided and minimized, you're always going to have a problem. So
this notion of an adversarial relationship with the media at an all new level.
Yeah.
There's never been a time where politicians went, oh, good, the media's here.
Right.
But now to treat the media like the enemy.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, too, because if you're an elected official, and you're awesome at this, Bridget, and I mean, you have been for years, you're an elected official, you talk with the media, it's part of the gig. And when I see Congress people or, walking past saying, I don't have to talk to you, that's kind of crazy because obviously the media is going to convey your message to the public, a.k.a. your constituents. So you've done that really well, but a lot of politicians just do not feel like they need to speak with the media, but they do.
Well, look, it's always hard because they're eventually going to say things about you that aren't flattering. And so everyone wants to avoid that. It's like not putting your hand on a hot stove. Right. It's just that it's kind of the implicit bargain that goes on. And the irony is the more you avoid it, the worse it gets. And so it's just, there's a level of kind of living in the world as it exists that they've been avoiding on the press side, and they need to change that. And that's not there's a lot of harder things to change than that, and so that should go first.
Right. Well, but here's the thing. I mean, you always make yourself available. Long before we were friends, we were talking about business.
Yeah.
And, once we became friends, you were more able to tell me to shut up and don't be an idiot. And, of course, I listened. But in the case of this conversation, the governor talks to his website. Or has an occasional gaggle of tons of people. Mm-hmm. The mayor didn't talk to anybody. Mm-hmm. And certainly Tony Preckwinkle doesn't talk to anybody or anybody she doesn't want to talk to. I don't know why the walls have to be created. Even Mayor Daley came on the air with me a few times, and I practically couldn't get Rom out of the studio.
That is true.
Yeah. I think that the expectation that you can manage through social media has changed the game a little bit because you have just an outlet to control what you're saying without actually having to appear in front of anyone who can question you. And that's been, that's kind of a false narrative.
So when you look at a 20% turnout or a 25% turnout, does the public care enough to fix this? Because if I'm a politician and I want to play these games, I go, well, until it matters, it doesn't matter. I can do what I want.
Well, look, it always matters. I think part of the low turnout in this election was driven by the fact that, the presidential race was off the table. There's no way to elect anyone there. But it's pretty profound. I mean, there was a handful of races people cared about. Danny Davis, there was a state Senate race on the Northwest side. There was obviously the state's attorney's race and the Bring Chicago Home referendum. But the fact that those 4 things weren't enough to get 20% of the people in the suburbs and 24% of the people of the city, more of them out.
It's amazing.
That's the lowest that's ever been in my lifetime. And that's pretty concerning. Let's
talk about the state's attorney's race. Obviously, this on everybody's mind.
1 week anniversary tomorrow. We still don't know.
1 week anniversary. This has been the closest race I've ever seen in covering city politics or county politics for years. This is the closest. And then we found out over the weekend that, hey, there were some ballots that weren't counted. They weren't picked up from the drop box. Have you ever seen anything like this in your...
Well, I think what often happens is ballots are counted for days and days after an election and every time, except usually it's not close enough that anyone even pays attention because the race has been called and everyone moves on. I think two things happened here to upend where we are. One is it was really close, and so obviously we all pay attention. But the second is there was a kind of over-exuberance in reporting how much of the final tally had happened in the city. And this is the funny thing about elections in Cook County. It's two separate, unrelated organizations that run the elections. There's the Chicago Board of Elections that runs the votes that come in the city. They set early voting. They set locations. All of those rules are there. And then there's the Cook County clerk, Karen Yarborough, who runs the suburban elections. The suburban elections have been pretty smooth.
Because we couldn't make it any more complicated?
Well, because look, in fairness, there are races that happen in the suburbs that have nothing to do with the city. And yes, so here we are. I'm sure that there was a logical / it'd be interesting to figure that one out, reason that these things were separated out, that the city wanted to run their own elections. I mean, what could go wrong? So, but here we are. But the suburban part has been pretty smooth. I mean, they got their totals, they reported them. There's things that will trickle in. I mean, the law in Illinois says that as long as your ballot is postmarked on election day, it gets counted. Now, the reality of the situation is you get first 2 or 3 days, you get big numbers coming in, and then it drops off precipitously because it doesn't, I'm not going to say it doesn't take more than 3 days to get a letter here because obviously we know that happens, but the numbers are pretty minuscule.
Right.
It was the problem, the issue at the City Board of Elections was that they kind of over-reported and said, okay, here's the tally, we're almost done, but then there was all these other ballots. Now, the good news is there was never a interruption in the chain of custody. It's not like there's no conspiracy here. It's just more that the expectations were set that we were almost done, and
But it looks really bad.
It looks terrible.
In 2024,
the optics.
In the world we live in 2024, it looks really bad. The combination of politicians hiding, not talking to the public, and now look, Tony Preckwinkle's chosen candidate, as the public believes in general, is now only 2,000 votes down when they were 9,000 votes down. I don't know why Preckwinkle and others wouldn't make a public statement today about integrity of elections, but I don't expect it.
That's interesting because, on the one hand, I think an elected official might feel like I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole because there's supposed to be independence at the Board of Election, and I don't want to make it look like I'm putting my finger on the scale here. But I think you're right. In this moment in time,
be a leader.
After the last 4 years of all of the controversy around the credibility of elections, you don't get to these mistakes are at higher cost. In another time, you might have been like, roll your eyes and move on, but not now. And especially because I think people had expectations that because the Bring Chicago Home referendum was lost, that it kind of looked like the electorate was going in a more moderate direction than we had. You saw the West Side congressional race with Danny Davis, stuck with Danny Davis, didn't go with the challenger. Now, I will say the Northwest Side state Senate race was Toro and Graciela Guzman, and Graciela Guzman was the more progressive candidate in the challenger, and she crushed it. And that was a massive organizing effort by, the organization that's really now run by Delia Ramirez, who's a congresswoman from the Northwest Side. But outside of that, the electorate kind of went more moderate. Mm-hmm. And so it made sense that you had a Burke win and a referendum loss. And so this is where people start to think, oh, wait a minute. Why would people vote against the referendum but for Clayton Harris?
Right.
Those two things don't make sense.
And more on this in a second.
It's a beautiful way to explain it. Very succinct.
Well, and also really, really annoying. More with Bridget Gaynor in just a second. Bridget Gaynor's here, Cook County Board. During the break, I talked her into running for everything. That announcement will come later. We're going to talk to Rick Pearson in about an hour. Pearson co-wrote a story over the weekend about the Illinois House Speaker's Office ordering Democratic lawmakers to not talk to the Chicago Tribune. It's just this rinse and repeat stupidity. There was a point where Lori Lightfoot said she wasn't going to talk to anybody but reporters of color. When everybody knows everything and everybody jumps to the worst thing, shouldn't we expect better from the folks in leadership positions?
Yeah.
By the way,
should.
interviewing
Yes.
tip number 1, kids, don't ask a 4-minute question that has a 2-word answer.
Exactly. Or a one-word
So,
answer.
yes. I mean, look, I think that whenever you tell someone don't talk to a reporter, then the reporter wants to go on a rabid vengeance
Say what?
tour to say, yeah, there must be something here. So if you are trying to hide something from me, it's like when your kid looks at you and has his hand behind his back, and he's like, I don't have anything. Nope, nothing here.
Nothing here to see. Move on, folks.
Nothing here. Yeah.
No, I haven't seen you. You probably already talked about this, but I haven't seen you yet this year in person. But I have to say congratulations. We were talking off the air about my goddaughter's considering Macaulay and Marist, all the
Go
great,
Macaulay.
I know.
Every time, go Macaulay.
And congratulations, you and your sisters were the Macaulay Trailblazers.
We were.
last month,
I'm one of
which is
5
cool.
sisters. We all went to Macaulay, and we were the honorees at their dinner in February.
By the way, we love your
cool.
furniture store commercials. Those are terrific.
No,
Yes,
that's totally different.
Well, that's different.
Different set of
sisters?
sisters. Different set of sisters.
And hi to the Smith girls. They're great.
Thank you.
All right, so let me jump back to the state's attorney's race. I gave Clayton Harris multiple interviews here, as I did Judge Burke. And in each case with Clayton Harris and Judge Burke, I said, let's break it down to something simple.
Yeah.
Shoplifting.
Yeah.
Shoplifting, there is a state statute that says a felony is $300. Kim Fox raised it to $1,000. Didn't have to, raised it to $1,000. Clayton Harris said he wouldn't touch it. And I said, what is there that's going to separate you for the voters from those who believe you're just Kim Fox 2.0? Because she is not popular. I don't know if anybody knew that. And his aunts, and I like Mr. Harris a lot. He's an incredibly likable guy. And he may end up being a great state's attorney if he wins. But that to me seemed like a huge pothole that he stepped in more than once.
Yeah. So I think it's always good to look at context and how things change. When Kim Fox got into office, the $300, first of all, we didn't have a massive shoplifting crisis where people were literally walking into stores and clearing
Just grab
out
whatever they
shelves
wanted.
in garbage bags and leaving. So it was a different time. Indiana has the same $1,000. So it was kind of like, well, let's make it make sense to a surrounding community. Okay, that makes sense. $300. You could argue that $300, there's always like someone stole $300 in baby formula, blah, blah, blah. So the change happened. But, then we had COVID and then we had spikes in crime. And so part of it is to always step back and say, okay, what's happening in the community right now? Where do we have to calibrate? Same thing with carjackings. Like there were changes in the way that our whole, city, county, this whole part of the state was experiencing crime. And so you have to calibrate and be responsive. I think Clayton is a really nice guy. I think the difference though is he, when I look at Eileen Burke in this race, her credentials around being in the judiciary on 2 different levels, being a prosecutor for, many years longer than Harris was briefly in the office. It's, the state's attorney's race, in some ways it gives you pause that it's even an elected position.
Right.
Having said that, you do have to have people be responsive to the community. And I think what we saw is there was a desire to move a little bit to the center, because even if Harris wasn't willing to move off on that specific issue, he definitely sounded way more moderate than Kim in running in the last two cycles. So
Right.
I think they realize that people are looking for something different.
The Bring Chicago Home referendum failed. And I want to say miserably. I mean, but it wasn't close.
Pretty sizable.
But I think a lot of people took exception to the fact that, when people see this, Bridget, and Cook County taxpayers, Chicago residents, Chicago taxpayers, people are always looking for, how's this going to affect me? And there were a lot of ads that said it's going to trickle down. It's going to be bad for small businesses and renters and those who wanted to make a first-time home buyer purchase or condo purchase. But Brandon Johnson last week said something, I don't think a lot of people would agree with, that it didn't pass, or those who voted against it would have supported Donald Trump, which I respectfully disagree with.
Well, I don't even respectfully disagree. I completely disagree because here's the thing. You can't be the guy that stands up and makes everything a black and white issue. You're generalizing black folks. That's a racist comment because I'm not a racist. And when he goes to that camp immediately, you can't then go, oh, well, you don't see it my way. You're a Trump supporter.
Well, look, that one of the biggest fictions in politics is, people are going to pick so in this state, we obviously have to declare a Republican or Democrat, which, to be honest with you, is absurd.
Of course it is.
It is.
So you have to pick that to vote in the primary. They're like, oh, you know what? People who are Republicans are going to switch and pick someone else. They don't do that. People do not. If you are a Democrat for your whole life, you're not picking a Republican ballot for the purposes of voting in one election. I think there's 3 other things that were going on in the Bring Chicago Home. Number one, there was a strong feeling, very strong in the Black community, that all of this money was really geared towards funding for migrants. And, for those of you who know your Bible, this whole conversation has reminded me of the prodigal son, which is, the Black community is like, hey, we've been here having issues for a long time. There's been issues of homelessness. And all of a sudden these new people come around and you kill the fatted calf. And
it's a great analogy.
Right.
So, in case you missed yesterday, Sunday Mass, I will. This will count. This will count.
Yeah, don't assume I didn't go to church.
I'm not going to assume.
Okay.
So part of it was like people had a suspicion of what this money was all about because the mayor tried to get money for migrants. It didn't go through, and then there was all this back and forth. The second thing is that raising taxes is raising taxes, and a lot of people are like, I'm not raising taxes, period, full stop. To say nothing of the fact that the actual referendum on the ballot was a word salad, to use, Steve, your line, ridiculous. But the third thing is, they never told you how they were going to spend it.
Right.
And so it wasn't, even for the advocates or the people who are really for it, they had no guarantees. And I think you're not wrong to remember when they passed said we were going to have the lottery and it was all going to go to education. And they said, well, yeah, here's the $7 I made from the lottery. I'm going to back out the other $7 right out the back door. And it was just a bait and switch. And so when you don't know, there's nothing codified to say, this is how I'm going to spend it. And I think it's really interesting to look at. We have 2 things in the offing right now. You had a referendum that was pumping money into affordable housing and economic development. And now you have a bond deal that the mayor's going to go to city council for that's likely to pass. That's a kind of similar amount of money. And it just shows the concern is when you go out to the voters and say, this is what I want to do, they're like, no, not doing that. So now you go back into city council where you have a little bit more sway because it's a smaller group and you can influence. Now, on the one hand, the bond deal is being funded in large part by getting rid of a lot of the TIF funds.
Yep. Which is not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea. And this gets back to the unbelievable inability to communicate, because a lot of those TIF funds should have been expired years ago. They keep going on and they never end because it's a faster way for the city to do development. In many cases, the money's legit, but it's like it's not a great system.
It's just always a political chip to play.
So, it could have been a good story, and it's like you had a beautiful steak and you served it on a garbage can lid. It just took.
Look at you. You were just filled with analogies.
I am an analogy person.
You're the analogy
I want to
lady.
keep it simple. I don't want people to have to work really hard to understand what I'm saying.
So you haven't been on in a while, and you remember who you're talking to when you look at me.
That's right.
That's fantastic. You got a last word?
I was just going to say, do you think we'll have a declared winner by COB, or you think we're going to wait till April 2nd?
How about before the DNC?
Yeah, it'll definitely be before the DNC, and I'm going to put my name on that.
Yeah.
I think we'll have it by the end of the week. And, look, I have no predictions, but it's always good to be ahead.
Yeah.
So.
There you go.
And no matter how down you feel about the process, you don't change a thing by staying home.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's true.
You have to be involved.
Right.
If you want to follow a cool story, the Land Bank is always doing great things, and that's your baby.
It's good stuff. We're just about to do have a little ceremony about our 2000th property. So, when it comes to Bring Chicago Home, the Land Bank's done 2,000 properties. The vast majority of 80-90% are just naturally occurring affordable housing. And the one thing about all the, any big dumps of money going into affordable housing is the system at the city of permits and land disposition is so broken that you're kind of putting big money into a broken mainframe. You got to fix some of those hard things at the building department before you spend a lot of more money.
Yeah.
What I always tell you.
Absolutely.
Is that what you always tell me?
No, I always tell you you're too smart for the show, but we appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, guys.
Because you and Andrea can
Thanks,
talk
Bridget.
on a level, and I just am over here looking pretty.
No.
It's Bridget Gaynor. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Thank
Thanks
you for
having
coming
me.
over.